right. Welcome back, everybody, to another Future of Church, where we are talking about faith, tech, and culture. I don't know, all sorts of stuff. We got an interesting topic today, but before we get into it, I am Christopher.
And I'm Joe.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Nailing it. Hey, it only took it took us a little bit, but we got the hang of it. So today we're talking about, we've talked a lot about chatbots and where that's going and some of the things that are happening. And there was a recent development that popped up that I had brought up with Joe, and I talked about on my podcast. And I was like, this is actually a really interesting one. So in Instagram, and I'll give you the context, Joe, because we haven't really talked necessarily about all the context around it. So for folks who aren't familiar, if you haven't seen the headlines about Instagram, what they're doing is they're rolling out their AI studio, which essentially allows Instagram influencers. Now, I'm not on Instagram, but I know enough about social to get the gist of how it works. And I see it from Ashley's that you can now add an AI version of yourself to your account that any of your followers can interact with. And so they can send you a message and they can talk to you and have a conversation with their favorite celebrities. But it does, at least the one thing I did go, okay, well, at least they're thinking about this. I'm not thrilled at the idea if you haven't picked up on this yet. But the one thing that they did do is it at least tells you, hey, you're talking to like AI Christopher or AI Joe. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, Joe, your reaction to this whole thing.
My literal first thought is, well, that sounds stupid. But I think at this point, people know I'm the more curmudgeonly of the two of us to start with. But as much as you're not thrilled with it for a lot of,
yeah, I'm not. This is one where I'm probably just as much.
Yeah, and practical. Like I just, because I know one of your first things is like, what's the actual use of this to the consumer? What's the like? Okay, so whatever. I'll let you quote yourself later if you want to. But I look at it, I'm like I can't even get past but why? Like, it's kind of like when you talk about like giving feedback or thinking about something you want to say, like, is it necessary? Is it helpful? It's just like, is it kind? Like, it's like, it's none of those things. It's probably neutral on the kindness part.
Well, yeah,
but it's like, there's some things like when AI, so just to contrast that with like hearing about learning about ChatGPT, like as a platform, as an idea, whatever. Like,
sure.
I heard, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can see that. Like, I can see where that could be helpful if people knew how to use it and whatever.
Okay, so even with like right. The kind of text-based that interface, like, sure. You even kind of initially were like, I can see it.
Yeah,
this
I can
doesn't
see the
fall
use
into
case.
That box.
But this one, I'm like, but why? Like, it doesn't even seem like a neat idea to me, I guess.
I mean, the thing with it was, what was really interesting about the announcement from Instagram was literally the week before, I had just done on my update this thing about this influencer who learned the hard way when she didn't use the AI Instagram chatbot, but she had built her own. And actually, I think this is where it's a little like, it was kind of behind the scenes. So if you were on the other side, you didn't know, which from a practical standpoint, I actually think that makes more sense. I think it's wrong on so many levels, but I think that makes more sense because you're like, well, you're trying to trick your people into thinking they're talking to you. So right. I actually understood. I would have said that's a bad idea.
Right.
But I would have understood like, oh, okay, I see your whole logic here type of a thing. But she learned the hard way when all of a sudden she started looking at the chat logs of these conversations and was like, oh my gosh, like this is what people are engaging in conversation with me with. And not only that, this is what my chatbot is actually starting and then perpetrating. So just having said like, then this is why you don't do it. And then it's like, guess what? Instagram's, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe this is the madness. But I think the why, as somebody who does a ton of stuff on LinkedIn, I get the allure of it to people who have massive followings, and there's tons of data out there that the more engaged you are with your followers, the more effective you'll be, the more product you can sell, the more crap you can, whatever it is, you'll be more successful.
Right.
So I get that's the temptation. Like, hey,
yeah,
you can engage with as many as you want, because guess what? You don't even have to be the one to do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's,
how could that go wrong?
Right. Well, even thinking back to as you said, it was the Zoom CEO who, wanted to send chatbots to all these meetings that he didn't have time for. And at least in that context, you think through like, okay, but he knows how many meetings he's in. And if he's, smart about it, he'll keep it to a limit where he can reasonably go through the transcripts and see what's going on and get a report back from these bots, whatever, summarizing stuff. Like it could work, whereas for this one, it seems like for the scale that it rolls out, like you're never going to really know.
You got 10 million followers on Instagram and you're going to just let a chatbot go bonkers.
Right. Yeah. I have someone I've been trying to get a hold of for a purchase follow-up for a year and a half. Like, I don't know, like, is that person going to keep up with all these chatbot things? And I'm also of, maybe it's of a generation, I don't know, where like you've had to go from talking to a real person to talk, for tech support, like for example, or support on anything, you're talking to a person and then, you get really miffed when now you have to go through like this huge phone tree that tries to get you, like even now, try calling CVS, like while you're on hold. Hey, you can do this through the app. I'm like, no, if I could do it through the app, I wouldn't be calling. That's why I'm on the phone right now, trying to speak to a pharmacist. And the, man, I don't know if you can hear it.
Yeah, I can. That sounds like Microsoft Teams.
And there's nothing I can do about it. Anyway, you might have to tell me what.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I had something that came to mind for me, and then you can regain your thoughts. But I think as you were talking about the Zoom CEO and like an Instagram influencer, as I'm thinking about those two, one of the things that really, again, tying it back to the scripture in this is something that I think is distinctly different. And I think there's still lots of risk associated with like the Zoom CEO, like, oh, we'll just do this. It really goes back to even what we see in the early chapters of Genesis, when we look at the purpose for which humans were created, which was to rule and reign over creation.
Yeah.
And so when I think about the example you talked about with like the Zoom CEO, where it's like, okay, I can see a world where he's still ruling over it. Like, okay, there's 3 meetings at once, but I'm still looking at the transcript. I'm still actively like making sure, and I'm actively involved in any decisions that are happening, and you're doing that. And I think where I get concerned, like with the big influencer thing, is you're scaling it to a point where it's like, that is beyond human capacity to rule now. So you are actually truly delegating your God-given responsibility, which is to rule with discernment and wisdom, and going, I'm just going to let this chatbot do it. Like, it's important and I want what it can give me, but I don't have the time or the energy to do it. So I'm just going to let this mindless, thing do it instead. And I'm like, I feel like that's where you're going, whoa, this is beyond just, well, it's convenient.
And so is the bot, does it just comb like your content for like how you might respond to things? Do you know what?
So my guess is, so I've dug into it a little bit, and in terms of, and this is where a lot of people don't realize how this stuff works, because even Ashley was asking me about the other day, and I was like, no, actually, that's not how these models are trained. So it follows similar to anybody who's played with AI, similar to like creating a custom GPT, which is there is a big LLM that has been trained on a preset bunch of data that, it's why it can respond to just everything. It understands how to engage with language and all this other stuff. It's trained on that. Then it's layering in some sort of guardrails around that big language model, which are supposed to provide some level of protection. But then with this, what it's doing is there's an additional layer being added on top of it, where I haven't seen the studio, but my guess is It's similar to a GPT where you'll tell it, look back at the history of all my posts.
Yeah.
If there are any other specific guidelines or guardrails you want to give to personalize it to your voice and whatever, you're giving it an additional layer of custom instructions that's on top of it. Because again, they're advertising it as like, it's like talking to you. And you're like, but it's not at all, actually. Like, kind of. It's this. I was telling Ashley, it'd be like, I just don't understand it from a consumer end, because to me, you could do this today without this. I could go to ChatGPT and say, ChatGPT, I'd like you to imagine you're Joseph Streeter, and Joseph Streeter is this person. So imagine you're him. Now I'm going to engage in a conversation with you, and I want you to respond to me as though you're him. And we could play this game right now.
Yeah.
The only difference is now I'm kind of fooling myself into actually going, no, but it's actually him-ish.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of the thread I was trying to chase down before I got interrupted by my real job, which is that notion that, like, I don't even want to talk to a phone tree. I don't have an interest in sitting and talking to a robot about whatever. And so, but we've talked before about kind of, as this becomes the water we swim in and the air we breathe, that the appeal is going to be somewhat more, to potentially misuse the term, mimetic in nature, where it just gets passed on. You're exposed to it. It's normal. And so that's what you do. And I could see where, from the influencer side, because when we talked about this before, you talked about how for them, they could see it as just an engagement tool. Like, they don't care to talk to these people. They don't want to, whatever, but it spurs on engagement. And then it'd be interesting to see how over time, different people who are more or less successful with that are able to, like, put the right guardrails in or produce the right content that, makes their chatbot more fun to interact with than other people's chatbots.
What's interesting about what you just said there, because I truly have racked my brain, and you might have actually just made me go, there might actually be a place for this. But for me, it's like in this very intentional, like, you're engaging with your audience in a way where it's like, I want you to engage with my chat for this purpose, but like you're driving it. And again, it goes back to this rulership. Like, you're ruling over it, and it's a tool for a specific purpose versus I want you to pretend to be me and be a pseudo version of it's like, that's a very different. Now, granted, I'd have to see some legit use cases to be like, let me see how you're planning on doing this. But I think from a user standpoint, think about, you hear stories of people who talk like they know celebrities because they read the news or they read, and you see this with influencers too, where because social media feels so personal, they talk. So I can only imagine, in some ways, I would be worried as an influencer of people like, just engaging with you differently or in more risky areas because they actually now truly believe they know you.
Yeah. Well, this is where getting into terms of service that I'm not familiar with, like, what are the rules around what gets communicated in direct messages versus what gets posted publicly? I know there was, it was where I saw it was presented in the context of a joke, as in like, is where I guess they were saying that X was now officially saying it's okay to post adult content, and people like, oh, is it now? Because of course it's been going on forever anyway. But I don't know what that's. I know Instagram is not okay with that, but I don't know if that extends to direct messages, private messages, from those types of accounts. But as we've talked about before, and your example from the influencer who had done it with her own model, like, what kind of interactions are going to be allowed or allowable depending on preference or despite preference, perhaps. And then, maybe it is clear, maybe it does say, you are chatting with with a bot, an AI bot, whatever. But if people are taking it from the perspective of, right, but it's a bot trained by this person, so
Right.
this must still be a representation of who they are and their brand, it kind of it circles back around to the conversations we've had recently about, okay, at what point do you flip your lid about something? At what point do you start assigning, value and ownership to a person for a statement or statements allegedly made or actions allegedly taken? Where does that lie in that spectrum?
Well, I think that's the really concerning part, is that, I've seen and just observed and studied so many of these cognitive disassociations that we can have, that when we want something, we can convince ourselves of just about anything. And so, like, again, even if it says, I am a chatbot, I am not the real, like, it can have as many like guardrails as it wants around it. You're still going to get people that, like you said, go,
oh
yeah, but like, I'm basically talking to so and so, because come on, it's essentially who they, and you're like, no, it's not. Well, yes, it is. And you're like, oh, you actually believe it. And the thing with it is, I won't get into detail because I don't actually want people to know how to do this. There are skeleton keys for AI. And if you know how to do them, it does not matter what guardrails have been put in place. You can unlock AI to do whatever you want if you know how to use the skeleton keys. And that's the part that I think, as people become more tech savvy with it, they learn that it's like, well, I know it's telling me that I'm not going to do this, but I know if I creatively word it this way and I say this specific thing, I can get it to, and I can just kind of conveniently erase my memory that I did that, so that I can start believing that this is actually what it wanted to do. And you're like, oh man, we can start going to some really dark places when you start doing that stuff.
Yeah. No, that's true.
So yeah, I don't know. It's funny though, talking to you, because like literally when I was reacting to this last week, I'm like, I cannot think of why anything. Like, and now I'm like, okay, I'm starting to put together some use case that I think could potentially. What I'm concerned about is, we just keep learning more and more that even what control we think we have over this, we don't. We don't have any control over it.
Yeah. And so, the mounting use cases, it kind of comes back a little bit to, some of the things that we encounter when we were working together. And, another group would be like, oh, we got this great new tech tool. We're bringing it in. We're doing this stuff. And we look at it, we're like, okay, yeah, neat. But what's the use case? Like, what are you using it for? What objective is it meant to meet? Or is this just going to be another thing on the pile of tech, because it's the newest thing, I'm going to adopt it. I just learned about this thing, we're going to adopt it. We just learned about this thing, we're going to adopt it. And, and you just, it's that, but at a massive scale that, to your point, it makes it impossible to control. It's like all these skeleton keys, you get enough people messing with a tool.
That's the thing.
You don't even
and influencers of all people. I'm like, you're going to put this in the hands of people who literally have millions of people who are going to engage with it.
Yeah. You don't need to know or advertise the skeleton key for someone to figure it out on accident. Like, the odds are in favor of somebody breaking it.
Yes. Oh, hands down. And I think, one of the other concerns that, again, I think just keeping it rooted in like the biblical side of things, is just this idea of, I very much see a world where we're losing what it means to actually be in community and in relationship with other human beings.
Oh yeah.
And everybody who knows me knows I'm not one to be like, that means we get in the room and spirit sprinkles and rainbow farts like that. I think there's a lot of ways that can be expressed creatively.
Yeah.
But I look at some of this stuff with AI and I go, this is going to open some real risks for eroding our ability to discern and distinguish being in community with other people and what does it really mean to be in a relationship with someone.
Because the more distance you have, the easier from the person you're interacting with, the easier it is to dehumanize them.
Yes.
Already. Like that's already something known because of social media.
We see that on social media. Yeah, people will rip somebody to shreds on social media that they would never say.
Yeah. And then, and it's, opening this door. I mean, we've talked about the fruits of the Spirit for sure, but there's also, the idea of like whatever is good, whatever is, I had it, it's gone now. But it's the think on these things passage.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, if you're not guarding your mind in such a way that those are the things that you're thinking on, and you're determined to think on those things, and that is your goal, it's that much easier to go into these situations where there's these fuzzy guardrails, there's no real rules, and start seeking out things that are not those things that we should be thinking on.
Right.
And, and that can be one of the things, like for me, that's one of the things that just like, it pulls me away from the situation to start with. Like when I'm in a healthy space, spiritually, mentally, my energy is good. And I, to use the words you used, kind of ruling over my space and my being.
Right.
Or as Paul says, subjecting my body. And doing those things, then that's sort of thing where I see something like that. I instantly see the danger in it. And I say, I'm not interested today.
Yeah.
No, thank you. And it just, as we get more surrounded by these things, and I don't care if this becomes a theme where people are like, yes, we get it. Yes, fine. It's if you're not in tune with what is real, you will be fooled by everything.
Yes.
Like, I'm not even going to say counterfeit. It doesn't need to be a counterfeit. You're just going to fall for it because you'll be like, yeah, you're not going to even see the danger coming. And
it's becoming so injected into every vein of, like, it's in every channel and it's just expanding. And to me, this is a big step where it's like, I mean, social media, you want to talk about making people who formerly were inaccessible now accessible, as though you can text them like your best friend.
Right.
You think there's not going to be consequences, even just with the sheer dramatic shift that's going to bring, where it's like, that's like going from fifth gear into first.
Right.
Maybe there's a world we can get there if you're kind of slowly downshifting. I still am hesitant, but I'm like, you had a manual. I remember driving your car. I know what happens. You drop your, clutch and pop it into a gear too low, too quick. Like, it's not healthy on the car.
Yeah. It's very not.
No. And I think, it's funny that you quote the Philippians verse, because the very first part of it is whatever is true.
Yes.
And this is the part that I'm like,
yeah.
I just think of Pontius Pilate going, what is truth? And I'm like, that's very much what I feel about whenever I think about AI, where you're like, well, is what it's saying true? Because the example they used in the Instagram that just made me pound my head was, it was like, it showed them asking your favorite influencer their favorite dad joke and all the entertainment value on that. And I'm like, but is it even true?
Right.
Because is that specific of a detail something that was ever shared? Or is it just presuming, based on its best calculation of the content and the filters that it has, that probably this is something that this person would think is funny, but it's representing it as though this is my favorite dad joke. And it's like, well, but that's a lie.
Right.
It's a lie. It's not like it's kind of like, no, it's a lie.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that's where going back to your point, as believers, it's not that we run from this stuff and just go, oh, it's evil, like it's terrible. It's like, well, no, we just need to be really thoughtful and mindful and intentional. But you can't do that if you don't understand it. And I think that's why I get so passionate about the tech, is I'm like, if you don't understand it, you might actually think it's true.
Yeah.
Because you might go, well, it wouldn't tell me that if they didn't say that. And it's like,
Right.
Well, actually it would.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly how it's designed to work.
Right. Yeah. It's a predictive engine in that
Right.
respect. Yeah. Yeah.
Which can be really helpful
Right.
in some environments. But I remember I had a chatbot trained on literally hundreds of hours of my stuff. And I kept it behind closed beta because I'm like, I really want to see what this thing can do.
Yeah.
And it was wrong 99 times out of 100. As close as it was to right was like, I mean, maybe I might say something similar to that, but I would actually probably even tweak that. And I'm like, so it's not accurate for something I think as personal as another human being. And I think that's where AI cloning to me is extremely concerning.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is a future topic, but the other thing I start thinking of is, it's not like it's available for every Instagram account, right? It's for influencers. It's for, places that are already monetized is my understanding. And, just that, okay, here's something that people who already have access to move forward. And I know we do that with any new technology, like
the haves and the have-not
technology, new computer stuff, whatever. It always starts expensive and then gets cheaper and more accessible over time. But I feel like, and this is something I've been thinking about recently, and so it's probably not a fully formed, cohesive thought, but just the idea that we're splashing these things down into as paid things, but not into niche markets. Like there's a lot more accessibility to something like this, even as a paid monetized thing, where at least in the short term, maybe it becomes more democratic in the future, probably it will, but like just the disparity between the tools that one set of people has access to and can use and the set of tools that other people have. So if this helps Instagram influencers like get ahead in big ways because it's an engagement tool, an entertainment opportunity, whatever, that draws more people in, but people who already have that are the ones with it. And
it's a really good point.
Can't compete. Like it's a polarization of that marketplace. And if other people, but if it's successful and it brings in money for Meta, across their platforms, X and, other people bring it in as well and, do whatever, like you get polarizations of those markets where it's harder to crack in. People who already ahead get further ahead.
Yeah.
Have a harder time.
Well, and we debated which topic we were going to talk
about. I know. That's why I said probably a future topic, but
this one's definitely one I think we need to talk about, especially as Christians, where we're told to care for the poor and the widow, and we're called into that. And so when we start to see things like this, exactly. It's like, so people who already have 10 million followers now have access to a tool that reaches them to 20 million followers type of a thing versus, and again, that model can break down if you're thinking just influencer. Yeah. I get it, but it goes back to this whole idea of the haves getting more and going, well, they already have it. And now they're going to have a 10x advantage on someone who doesn't. And what does that mean for, someone who doesn't have access? And that's especially hard as things are moving so fast right now, which we won't spend too much time on it because that, good grief, we start digging into this one. But I think the other thing that you brought up as I was thinking about that, and now I completely slipped because my phone started ringing. So we're just on a overall gangbanger, kind of like spree here today. But let me think, what was it? It had something to do, as you talked about the disparity that comes with it. I don't know. It'll probably come back in a minute.
Yeah. I don't know. Unlike you, I didn't have another filler to jump back in on. But I'm sure you were about to make an excellent point, so I'll acknowledge it.
Hey, there you go. You're being like an AI algorithm. You're just predicting what I might have said and saying,
I'm
great
sure
point, Christopher.
Incredible.
It's very good.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a really tough thing. I think, I just even think about, it gets brought up every time you're talking about like workplace and being a young person. Like, still, it's like, can you convert all these Word to PDF? And what I think is funny is the example. It's like, oh yeah, you could, make a tool that does that, just a thing macro does it for you. I'm like, or you can like multi-select and ask it to, I don't know. It's even easier than your solution. So who's the idiot here? Ha ha ha. And then I get to feel nice and superior with that. But it's just like, okay, if every week there's something new and you're a person who's like, I'm barely interested, but I know I need to know what's going on. So how do I even keep up? And then how do I disciple my kids through this? How do I, without reverting to just generalities?
Yeah.
As a parent, that weighs on me. As a person who's done youth ministry, that weighs on me, on behalf of the people doing youth ministry. Because like we don't get into that, we don't get into parenting and we don't get into youth ministry. Because we're super jazzed about social media and technology.
Right.
And so maybe we've talked about this before, I don't remember, but it almost feels like you have a binary choice between, shrugging your shoulders and effectively sticking your head in the sand and hoping everything works out, or taking a drastic shift towards being deep in technology and understanding it super well and starting to hit it directly, and that there's no middle ground. And you just like, you're constantly just being told you're further behind than you thought you were.
Well, and I think that is one of the reasons, though, why we started something like this. And even I was on a podcast recently where somebody was like, how do people keep up? And I said, you find the people who are passionate and are gifted in this, and you look to them to go, but what do I really need to know about this?
Right.
Like, I get it, and I could spend hours and hours and hours trying to understand all the implications of it. Or I'm going to trust somebody who I feel is a trusted source, who isn't trying to sell me something, that's just trying to say, hey, here is the wisdom that you can take from this. And I think that honestly is the only way, because there's lots of things that I'm like, I can't keep up with. And so I look to other people in my community, which is why I love the diversity of the church, to be like, hey, that's your jam. So you tell me what this looks like, because I don't have mental capacity to keep it all in. So give me the Cliff Notes version of it.
Yeah.
But I did remember what I was going to say.
I'm excited.
Before I did, which again goes back to this practical piece for people, is when I think about this, and this is one of the concerns I had with it, is when you really think about influencers and what they're trying to do, so often what they're trying to do is sell you a vision of something that you want. And so a lot of times it might be in conflict with what God wants for you. And I think that's that healthy tension of, it's trying to sell you this world, this image, this thing. And oftentimes, not only is it creating this like, oh, I don't have that and I just want to get to it. A lot of times they're also trying to sell real stuff that you don't need, that costs real money as well. And that's their big monetary process is, well, buy my shirt, buy my book, sign up for my class. I also got this other thing. And so I think that's a real watch out for consumers who are engaging in this, to go, hey, just so you know, this AI version might seem fun and entertaining, but remember, it's also trained to get you to believe that whatever it is they are standing for is the solution to whatever problem you have in your life. And they've got all the things that you can just buy from their store to get it. And I get it. I understand the consumer model. I understand in a capitalistic society why that's the way things work. But if you're not aware that that's happening and that's behind the scenes, and this is what is being driven at you, you can fall for it and go, if I just sign up for this masterclass, my YouTube channel will have 10 million followers too. And it's like, well, oh, well, maybe not. So just be careful as this catchy little AI influencer is telling you, answering all your questions for you and goes, you know what you should do is this.
Yeah. Well, that was actually reminds me. Yeah, it was someone on Threads who was posted this whole thing about how they got scammed out of $1,200 for a class. Like, it was supposed to be one-on-one mentoring is what they thought they bought, and it turned out it wasn't one-on-one mentoring so much as you go through the class and you ask me questions, I'll give you advice, sort of a thing. It wasn't actually like structured mentoring. And but then their pinned thread on their account is, you may know that I got scammed out of this thing here, and I didn't know what to do until I found this other program, which you can now buy from me. You know, like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And then someone asked, like, so, because at first it was like, yeah, I got totally scammed. I'm not getting what I asked for, whatever. And they're like, so, but you're still in contact? Well, yeah, we're still in contact. It was just, you know, I thought it was this, and they were like, no, we're really selling this, so this is how this works. So I'm still going through the program. It's like, so you didn't really get scammed out of all of it.
Yeah.
And then you're still trying to use that to like do the don't be fooled by the fake stuff, do my thing.
Right.
You know,
and I think some of the stats out now are showing that AI has reached a level of maturity, and with Project Strawberry, which is just fun to say in general, you know, with advanced reasoning, it's already reasoning and influencing at the level of a human being.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think my caution to people is just like, hey, be aware you are dealing with a very intelligent entity that has an agenda. So just know that, and know that that's happening. And again, if you know that, if you're rooted in the truth, then you'll see it for what it is and go, yeah, I'm not falling for this junk. But if you don't, that's when you find yourself thinking you're best friends with this person with 10 million followers and buying all their stuff because their AI chatbot told you that this is what they really love and what they want, and they can't wait to see at the next meetup. And you're like, oh, it'll be great. You're like, you should even talk to a human.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. Well, hopefully people found this helpful, even just getting your wheels turning about it and having some practical responses to it. Because again, it's coming. There's no turning it off. And I think we're only going to see it more and more. So we'll continue keeping up. I'm looking forward to talking about the economic one, because that one's,
I'm excited.
That one's coming like a freight train. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, listening. Hopefully you found something valuable in this. And if there's topics or things you want to ask or put on our agenda in terms of, hey, what do you think about this? Send it our way and we will add it. And with that, we will see you on the other side.